I'm Elena Bradford, and I'm 33 years old. I live in a restored craftsman bungalow on the edge of Asheville, North Carolina. If you'd met me a year ago, you'd have seen someone who tried too hard to please everyone, especially the people I married into. But everything changed when my grandmother, Martha Langley, passed away. She was the strongest person I've ever known. Martha survived 2 recessions, raised my mother on her own, and quietly built a real estate portfolio that no one in the family ever knew about. When she died, I thought she'd left me a handful of keepsakes and maybe the little condo where she lived overlooking the Blue Ridge Mountains. 6 months after my wedding to Darren Bradford, I was called to the office of her attorney, Mr. Lewis Finch. It was a cold November morning, and the leaves were falling in golden piles around the courthouse. I remember thinking I was going to leave with a few dusty ledgers and her vintage sewing machine. Instead, Lua handed me a thick folder. Inside were the deeds to 3 properties: a craftsman bungalow downtown worth almost $900,000, a modern loft near Biltmore valued at over $1.2 million, and Martha's own condo. Altogether, it was worth more than $2.5 million. My hands trembled as I signed the papers, and Louis looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Your grandmother was adamant about this. These properties belong to you alone. She also left you a note." He pulled out a small envelope with my name written in Martha's neat cursive. Inside, the note was short but clear. "Elena, never let love blind you to your own worth. Don't let anyone decide for you when it comes to money, not even your husband." Those words felt like both a blessing and a burden, because I was newly married, and Darren believed we were starting from scratch together, building a life brick by brick. How could I explain that I'd already been handed something I never asked for but would have to protect? I didn't tell him. Not at first. I told myself it was temporary, that I'd share everything once I knew where our marriage was headed. But deep down, I knew I was afraid. Afraid that this fortune would change how he saw me, the way it had changed how past boyfriends had treated me. One ex, Jacob, once drained $15,000 out of our shared savings to fund a doomed craft beer startup. Another, Brian, used to say, "Well, you make more money anyway," whenever the check came. Those were the bruises on my trust, and they never really faded. When Darren and I got married, I truly believed he was different. He worked as a communications manager at his parents' property development company. He was gentle, intelligent, the kind of man who never raised his voice. But there was always one thing I couldn't quite figure out: his mother, Teresa Bradford. Teresa was polite in public but controlled everything behind the scenes. She had a way of asking questions that felt less like curiosity and more like an audit. When she hugged me at the wedding, she whispered, "Welcome to the family. We take care of our own here." But something about the way she said it felt more like a warning. A few weeks after we returned from our honeymoon in Charleston, I started noticing small red flags. Teresa would send me emails about smart ways to manage newlywed finances, links to real estate trusts, and suggestions to consolidate assets. I ignored them at first, but part of me wondered if she already knew about Martha's properties. And if she did, how far would she go to claim a piece of it? I never imagined how quickly I would find out. If you've ever felt like someone was trying to read your mind, you'll understand what happened next. 2 months after Martha's inheritance became official, Darren and I were invited to what Teresa called an intimate family dinner. She said it would just be the 4 of us: Darren, me, Teresa, and Darren's father, Robert Bradford. I didn't realize until we pulled into the long circular driveway of their sprawling estate that intimate meant an evening of subtle interrogation. Their house sat on a hill just outside Asheville, a massive white colonial with ivy curling up the brick chimneys. Inside, everything gleamed. Crystal decanters lined the sideboard. Antique portraits watched from the walls like silent judges. As soon as we arrived, Teresa greeted me with a smile so polished it barely looked real. She kissed my cheek and said, "Elena, you look radiant. Marriage must suit you." But when she took my coat, her eyes traveled down to the handbag I carried, the same one Martha had given me years ago. She studied it like she was tallying its worth. Dinner was served in a walnut-paneled room lit by a chandelier the size of a small car. We sat at a long table with place cards, Teresa at the head, Robert at the far end, Darren and I across from each other. The main course hadn't even arrived when the questions began. "So, Elena," Teresa began lightly, "what exactly is it you do at the publishing platform?" "I'm the content manager," I said. "I oversee editorial planning, audience strategy." "Ah," she interrupted with a gentle nod. "And is that secure?" "Digital media, I mean. A lot of people don't last long in that field." I felt Darren shift in his chair. He knew I hated these kinds of comments, but he didn't speak up. Robert sipped his wine and studied me over the rim of his glass. "And your family? I believe your grandmother was quite involved in real estate?" My heart jolted. I had never told them that. I hadn't even told Darren the full story. "Yes," I said carefully. "She invested over the years." "Interesting," Teresa murmured, her lips curling into a faint smile. "I think I may have met her once. At a Rotary Club charity auction." I felt something cold slide down my spine. Martha never went to events like that. She hated social functions. She spent her evenings reading investment reports and tending her balcony garden. The rest of the dinner blurred into a polite haze of small talk and veiled barbs. By dessert, I was drained. As we drove home, Darren looked over at me and asked, "Are you okay?" I forced a smile. "Just tired." But I wasn't just tired. I was starting to understand that Teresa didn't simply want to know me. She wanted to know everything I had. A few days later, it got stranger. I came home from work to find a cream-colored envelope wedged into the mailbox. The return address said Lorna Bell Financial Advising. Inside was a letter inviting me to a women's wealth management seminar at a downtown hotel. It sounded harmless until I looked up Lorna's name and found out she'd once worked for Bradford Holdings, the same company Robert and Teresa owned. I didn't reply. But the following afternoon, I spotted a man in a dark windbreaker loitering near my porch steps. He pretended to read the community bulletin board, but every so often, he glanced up at my door. My stomach clenched. Martha always used to say, "When someone gets too curious about your money, ask yourself what they're hiding about theirs." That night, I finally told Darren what had happened. He was sitting on the couch reading emails when I dropped the envelope in his lap. "Did your mom mention anything about this?" I asked. He frowned. "No. Why?" "Because it feels like someone is trying to audit my life." Darren exhaled slowly. "You're overthinking it." "I'm not." He didn't argue, but he didn't defend me either. The next morning, I woke up to find a thick packet on the kitchen counter. A note was paperclipped to the front in Teresa's slanted handwriting. "Elena, I thought you might find this market analysis helpful. It seems the area around your grandmother's old condo is appreciating fast. Don't let anyone convince you to sell low." I held the papers like they were toxic. I turned to Darren, who was pouring coffee. "Did you tell her about the condo?" "No, I swear." "Then how does she know?" He just stared at me, lost for words. The final straw came on a gray Thursday morning. I was working from home when my phone rang. "Hello?" A woman's brisk voice came through. "Mrs. Bradford, I'm calling on behalf of Teresa Bradford's attorney. She'd like to arrange a private meeting to discuss your long-term financial commitments within the family." I felt my pulse in my throat. I have no obligation to share any of my personal finances. She believes it would be in everyone's best interests to align expectations. I hung up without another word. My hands were trembling. When I was a little girl, Martha once told me, if they can't get you to give something freely, they'll find a way to make you feel like you have to. That was the day I stopped pretending this was all harmless curiosity. I wish I could say that was the worst of it, but it wasn't. 4 days after that unsettling phone call, I was working in the living room when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. No deliveries, no appointments. When I checked the peephole, I felt my stomach lurch. Teresa Bradford was standing on my porch in an ivory coat, her hair smoothed perfectly into a low bun. Beside her was a tall man in a charcoal suit holding a slim leather briefcase. I didn't open the door immediately. For a moment, I thought about pretending I wasn't home. But I knew Teresa too well. If I didn't answer, she'd just find another way. I opened the door, keeping one hand on the frame. "Good morning, Elena," she said in that syrupy voice she reserved for manipulating people. "I hope we're not intruding." I said nothing. "This is Mr. Calvin Brooks, our family notary. We just have a few documents we'd like you to look over." I felt a chill run over my skin. "I didn't agree to meet with you." "Oh, I know," Teresa said sweetly, "but it's important." Before I could protest, she stepped past me into the foyer, her heels clicking against the hardwood. Mr. Brooks followed silently, already unclasping his briefcase. I closed the door slowly and turned to find them settling into my dining room as though they'd been invited. "What kind of documents?" I asked, my voice flat. Teresa smiled as she pulled a folder from her handbag. "Just a little asset protection paperwork. Nothing major. We Bradford women always use a trust system. It keeps things safe, efficient, and uncomplicated." She laid the folder open on the table, revealing a thick stack of legal forms. The first page bore my full name. My breath caught. "This isn't your concern," I said quietly. "It is," she corrected, her tone still smooth, but her eyes cold. "You see, when you marry into a family, your assets impact everyone, especially when you have such substantial holdings." I clenched my jaw. I inherited those properties before I ever met Darren. They're legally mine. Teresa tilted her head, studying me like I was a stubborn child. "Of course, but it's in everyone's best interest to combine them into the family trust. It protects you from liability. And it makes planning for the future much simpler." I looked down at the first page again. A line in bold letters caught my eye. "Full authority over assets shall remain with the trustee for the duration of the agreement." I felt something hot surge up my spine. "So you're asking me to sign everything over to you?" "To the family," Teresa corrected, her lips curling into a polite smile. "Robert and I are simply the trustees." I took a deep breath and placed the page back on the table. "No." Teresa blinked. "No? No," I repeated more firmly. "I'm not signing anything. These properties are not Bradford assets and they never will be." Mr. Brooks shifted uncomfortably. But Teresa didn't even flinch. She dabbed her perfectly lined lips with a linen handkerchief. "I don't understand why you're being so reactive, Elena." "Reactive?" My voice cracked. "You showed up uninvited to my home with a notary to pressure me into giving up control of everything my grandmother worked for." She sighed as though I were being difficult. "This is just how we do things. Even Darren's sister transferred her shares into the trust when she married. It's about stability." I felt my hands shaking, but I kept my voice steady. "Well, I'm not your daughter, and I'm not giving you control over my life." Before Teresa could reply, my phone started buzzing on the counter. It was Darren. I picked up and put it on speaker. "Hey," he said, sounding cautious. "Is everything okay? Mom said she might stop by." "She's here," I said evenly. "With a notary. They're trying to get me to sign over Martha's properties into your family trust." Silence. Then Darren exhaled sharply. "Mom," he said, his voice low and tight, "what the hell are you doing?" "I'm doing what's best for everyone," she replied calmly. "No, you're not." His voice grew colder. "You will leave Elena's house. Right now. And you will never try this again." Teresa's expression didn't change, but her eyes hardened as she rose from her chair. "You're playing a dangerous game," she said, folding the documents neatly back into her bag. "No," I said, finally letting my anger show. "You are. And you just lost." She stared at me for a long moment, her expression as unreadable as polished marble. Then she turned and walked out the door, Mr. Brooks trailing behind her. When the door clicked shut, I realized my hands were still trembling. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might be sick. I called Louis Finch, my grandmother's attorney, and told him everything. He listened without interrupting. "Elena," he said gently, "do you still have your copies of the original deeds?" "Yes." "Good. Bring them to me first thing tomorrow. We'll lock down every legal safeguard we can." "What if they try something else?" I asked. "Then we fight them." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying Teresa's voice in my head. "You're playing a dangerous game." Maybe I was, but I wasn't going to lose. After Teresa walked out of my house, I stood in the kitchen for almost an hour, too wired to sit down. I kept thinking about Martha, how she'd warned me that love doesn't always protect you from betrayal. That sometimes it just gives people better access to everything you own. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the floorboard sounded like another invasion. Every shadow looked like someone waiting to force my hand. By morning, I had made up my mind. I packed the notarized copies of Martha's deeds, the trust documents Teresa tried to push on me, and every scrap of correspondence into a cardboard box. Before I left for Louis Finch's office, I sent Darren a short text. "I'm meeting with the attorney this morning. I have to protect what she left me. I need you to understand why." I didn't expect an immediate reply, and I didn't get one. Louis was waiting in his office when I arrived, wearing the same kind, tired expression he always had. He took the box from my hands and started sorting everything without a word. When he finally looked up, his voice was calm but firm. "Elena, I'm going to file a legal declaration of independent ownership. This will ensure no one can use your properties as collateral or attach them to any family business debts. But you need to know something." I braced myself. "What?" "This is probably not the end. People like Teresa don't just walk away because you say no." I nodded. My stomach felt like a clenched fist. As I drove home, my phone buzzed with a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something told me to answer. "Hello?" A man cleared his throat on the other end. "Mrs. Bradford?" "Yes." "My name is Gregory Nash. I'm not sure I should be calling you, but I used to be the lead accountant at Bradford Holdings." My heart started to pound. "Why are you calling me?" "I think you deserve to know the real reason Teresa is so interested in your inheritance." I swallowed. "Go on." He hesitated, as though weighing whether to continue. 3 months ago, I resigned after refusing to sign off on some questionable reports. The company is in severe debt, more than $700,000 after a failed real estate investment and some personal financial issues. "What kind of personal issues?" "Mr. Bradford, Robert, has been borrowing heavily to cover gambling losses. The banks won't lend to them anymore. They're trying to find other collateral to secure a bridge loan. Your properties would solve that problem." I felt the world tilt under me. "They were planning to put your assets in the family trust and list them as backing for a loan from a private lender," Gregory continued. "I know this is probably a lot to process. But you needed the truth." I pressed a hand over my eyes. "Does Darren know?" "I don't think so. He was never included in the meetings. Teresa and Robert kept him in the dark about almost everything." After we hung up, I just sat in my parked car, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. When I finally went inside, I didn't even bother taking off my coat. I opened my laptop and started typing a long email to Louis. I attached everything: Gregory's statement, the copies of the trust documents, Teresa's emails. When I was done, I sat back and let out a shaky breath. My heart was beating so fast it felt like a drum in my chest. A few hours later, Darren came home. He looked tired, more tired than I'd ever seen him. He didn't say anything at first, just set down his briefcase and stared at me across the kitchen. "Did you talk to my mother?" he asked finally. "Yes." He closed his eyes for a moment. "She called me this afternoon. She's furious." "She tried to steal from me?" I said, my voice low. "I know." Something about the way he said it made me stop. "What do you mean?" Darren rubbed his forehead. "I know she did this to my sister too. She and Robert pressured her to sign over her house years ago. She's been too scared to speak up." I sank into a chair. "And you never thought she'd do it to me?" "I didn't think she'd be this brazen." I picked up the stack of papers and held them out to him. "This is everything they were going to use to list my properties as collateral. They didn't just cross a line, Darren. They bulldozed it." He took the papers, skimming them in silence. Then he looked up at me, and for the first time there was no trace of denial in his eyes, only resignation. "What do you want to do?" he asked quietly. I took a deep breath. "I want to call a meeting, with all of us. And I'm going to set the terms this time." He nodded slowly. "Okay. Okay?" "Yes." He set the papers down. "Because if I don't back you now, then I'm complicit." That night, I sat at my grandmother's old desk and drafted my conditions. Every single one of them. I knew Teresa would hate it, but I didn't care. If they wanted help, they were going to have to do things on my terms. The morning of the meeting, I woke up before dawn. I sat at the kitchen table in my grandmother's old robe, the steam rising from my coffee as I read over my notes again and again. It didn't matter how many times I rehearsed. My hands still shook. My voice still caught in my throat when I pictured Teresa's face. But I knew something now. Fear only grows when you stay silent. At noon, Darren and I drove together to my condo, the one Martha left me overlooking the Blue Ridge foothills. The place had always been my refuge, but today, it felt like a war room. I set the documents on the reclaimed wood dining table and waited. At precisely 1 o'clock, Teresa and Robert arrived. Teresa was dressed in a sleek charcoal suit, her hair pinned back in that immaculate bun. Robert looked smaller than I remembered, shoulders stooped, the lines on his face etched deeper. Neither of them spoke as they sat across from me. Darren took the chair beside me and rested his hand on my knee under the table. I opened my folder and met Teresa's eyes. "I appreciate you coming," I began, my voice steady. "I'm going to be very clear. I am not here to debate. I am here to state the conditions under which I will agree to help." Teresa raised a sculpted eyebrow. "You presume we're asking for help." I folded my hands over the folder. "You are. You wouldn't be here if you weren't." Robert looked away, his jaw working. Teresa's gaze was ice. "You have 3 conditions," I continued, "and if you can't agree to them, this conversation ends right now." Teresa didn't respond, so I pressed on. "First, Robert must enroll in a residential gambling treatment program, not some casual outpatient counseling, a full 45-day commitment. I've already arranged a referral at Briarwood Recovery Center." Robert opened his mouth as though to protest, then shut it again. His hands twitched in his lap. "Second, Darren will resign from Bradford Holdings immediately. He has accepted an offer at a communications firm in Charlotte. There will be no further financial entanglement between my husband and your company." Teresa's jaw tightened. "You're dictating my son's career now?" "No," Darren said quietly, before I could answer. "I am. I can't keep pretending everything's fine when it's not. The room went very still. Third, I said, meeting Teresa's gaze without flinching. You will sign a formal letter acknowledging that you attempted to coerce me into transferring my inheritance and that you will have no further involvement in my financial affairs. No more emails. No more surprise visits. No more pressure. Teresa's expression didn't change, but Robert looked up sharply. You're asking her to apologize? Yes, I said simply. Because I'm not going to let this get swept under the rug like every other time you've manipulated this family. For a long time, no one spoke. I could feel Darren's heartbeat in the way his hand tightened around mine. Finally, Teresa inhaled slowly and spoke in that careful, measured voice she always used when she was trying to regain control. You have no idea what you're doing, Elena. You're right, I replied, my voice quiet but firm. I have no idea how you've lived so long believing other people's lives are yours to manage. But I do know one thing. I'm not going to be the next casualty. Robert looked over at Darren. His voice was hoarse. Son, can't you talk sense into her? Darren didn't look away from me. Dad, he said, I think for the first time in my life, someone is finally making sense. Teresa's mask slipped, just for a second. Her lips parted. Her eyes shimmered with something almost like disbelief. Robert, she began, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. Please. No, he interrupted. He swallowed hard and turned to me. I'll do the treatment. God knows I need it. I nodded. Teresa's hands tightened around the edge of the table. I will sign your letter, she said eventually, her voice brittle. But don't think this absolves you of your obligations to this family. I tilted my head. I don't have obligations to this family's debts, only to my marriage, and I've been clear with Darren about my boundaries. I could see it in her eyes, how much she hated that word. Boundaries. It was something she had never respected in anyone else. When I stood, Darren stood with me. Teresa watched us, her gaze as hard as the winter light flooding the condo. You're making a mistake, she whispered. No, I said calmly. I'm making a choice. They left in silence. I watched them walk to their car, Robert moving slowly, Teresa's hand tight around his arm. As their SUV disappeared down the street, I realized I was shaking, but this time it wasn't fear. It was relief. Darren turned to me, his voice low. I'm sorry, he said, for not seeing it sooner. I closed my eyes and leaned against his shoulder. I don't need you to fix your parents, I whispered. I just need you to stand next to me. And for the first time since the day Martha died, I felt like I wasn't alone in this fight. 3 days after that meeting, Robert checked into Briarwood Recovery Center. There was no dramatic send-off, just a quiet resignation as he signed the papers and disappeared behind the frosted glass doors. Darren officially resigned from Bradford Holdings the same afternoon. He wrote a short email to the board. I'm grateful for everything I learned here, but it's time to step away. My priorities have changed, and I wish you all the best. Teresa didn't reply to his email, but I knew she read it. For weeks afterward, I waited for the next escalation. I expected another knock on my door, another veiled threat or guilt trip. But instead, there was silence. And in that silence, something shifted. I started to breathe again. That December, I finally decided what to do with the life Martha had left me. I sat in my grandmother's old armchair and drafted a plan for the Martha Langley Foundation, a program dedicated to teaching young women how to build and protect their own financial futures. I didn't want it to be just a scholarship fund. I wanted it to be something Martha would have been proud of, a place where knowledge meant safety and boundaries were respected. I opened a new account and allocated a percentage of the rental income from the 2 properties I didn't live in. Then I called my old professor from the community college where I took night classes in my 20s. By the end of the week, she had agreed to help launch the foundation's pilot workshops. One morning, as I was reviewing lease agreements, my phone rang. It was Teresa. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail, but something told me to answer. Her voice sounded different, quieter, almost tired. "Elena," she began, "I'd like to see you." I hesitated. "Why?" "Because you deserve an apology that isn't written on a lawyer's letterhead." We met at a cafe near the courthouse, the same one where Martha used to take me for hot chocolate after I aced an exam. Teresa arrived alone. No perfect blazer, no immaculate bun. Just a simple gray sweater and a pair of plain flats. When she sat down, she looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time. "I was wrong," she said, her voice small, "about a lot of things." I didn't respond. She took a slow breath. "I spent my entire marriage trying to control everything, thinking that if I held on tight enough, it would keep the cracks from showing. But the harder I gripped, the more it slipped away." I studied her face, really studied it. For the first time, I saw not a villain, but a woman exhausted by her own choices. "You don't have to explain," I said quietly, "but you do have to understand why I won't ever let it happen again." She nodded. "I do." Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a slim envelope. "This is a donation agreement. I'd like to contribute to your foundation. No strings attached, no seat on the board. Just help." I took it slowly. "Why?" "Because your grandmother was right," Teresa whispered. "Success isn't measured by what you own. It's measured by what you pass on." After she left, I sat alone in the cafe for a long time, letting her words sink in. I didn't know if I could ever trust her, but I knew she had finally stopped trying to own me. And maybe, in her own way, she was trying to let go of everything she'd clung to for too long. That winter, Darren started his new job in Charlotte, working for a company that focused on environmental campaigns and public education. He came home every Friday with a light in his eyes I hadn't seen since the first year of our marriage. In January, I found out I was pregnant. When I showed Darren, he didn't say a word. He just wrapped his arms around me and buried his face in my shoulder. For the first time, I felt like everything was exactly where it belonged. In the months that followed, the Martha Langley Foundation officially opened its doors. We started small. 3 workshops in borrowed classrooms at the community college, each one filled with young women who reminded me of myself, determined, hopeful, terrified of being taken advantage of. One afternoon, a girl named Tessa came up to me after class. She was 19, with chipped purple nail polish and a quiet, serious gaze. "Do you really think someone like me can ever own property?" she asked. I smiled and thought of Martha, of every boundary I'd learned to hold. "You don't need someone else's permission," I told her. "All you need is knowledge and the courage to say no when someone tries to take it from you." Some nights, I still catch myself replaying all the ways this could have ended differently. If I'd signed that trust, if I'd kept my mouth shut, if I'd let them chip away at my independence, one favor at a time. But then I remember the look on Tessa's face, the hope in Darren's eyes, the feeling of Martha's legacy living on. And I know I chose the right fight. Because protecting what you've built isn't selfish. It's necessary. And no matter how many times you have to say no, or how many people you disappoint along the way, it's worth it to stand up for the life you know you deserve. Family isn't where you're born. It's what you build with trust, respect, and clear boundaries. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever had to stand your ground to protect your future, I hope you know you're not alone.